we want to graph the function y equals x to the negative 1. Now x to the negative 1 means 1 over x. Negative exponent means we take the reciprocal and apply the power without the negative. So that negative 2 raised to the negative 1 power is going to be negative 2 to the negative 1 is 1 divided by negative 2, which is of course negative 1/2, and that's what we have here. If we take the reciprocal of negative 1, we get 1 over negative 1, which is of course negative 1. We're going to ignore the 1/2, the 0 and the 1/2, the negative 1/2, 0 and 1/2 for a moment. The reciprocal of 1 is 1, the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. Now, many people will at this point plot 4 points. 1, 1, 2, 1/2, negative 1, negative 1, negative 1, negative 1/2. They'll see a curvature here, and they'll understand that as x gets larger, this fraction is going to get smaller so that the graph approaches the x-axis. Similarly over here, the graph approaches the x-axis. Now, what people often then do, because they don't consider what happens between negative 1 and 1, well, often they'll say that the reciprocal of 0 is 0. So that gives them a point right here. And then they just kind of flop this thing around and do this. And they get a graph that looks like this. Now there are graphs that look like that. That's not an unreasonable graph, but it's not at all right for this function. So let's talk about why. At negative 1/2, we see that the reciprocal of negative 1/2 is 1 over negative 1/2. So we're dividing 1 by 1/2. Now, if this is 1, then this is 1/2. 1/2 goes into 1 twice. It takes 2 of these to make this. So negative 1/2 is going to give us negative 2. When we divide 1 by 1/2, well, it takes 2 halves to make 1. So the result is going to be 2. And we're still not going to worry about 0 for the moment, but you see that gives us a point here, and a point here, a point here, a point here, and a point here. Suggesting that maybe the graph keeps on going up like this, maybe keeps on going down like this. Let's consider 0. What does 0 to the negative 1 give us? That's 1 divided by 0. Now, if this is 1, this is 0. Nothing there. How many times will this go into 1? There is no answer to that question. We can count to 1 by 1/10, 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, and up to 1. And we see that 1/10 goes into 1 10 times. It takes 10 of these to make this. 1/100th is much smaller, but still there's little space there, and it takes 100 of those to make 1. How many zeros does it take to make 1? Well, go ahead, count to 1 by zeros and tell me when you're done. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. See, there I started before you finish. Okay, you see that it can't be done. That's why it's undefined. You cannot divide by 0 because you can't count anything by 0. Division is just counting to a number by another number. We see that the closer we get to 0, the more times the number is going to go into 1, so the greater the result. So we do have this vertical asymptote here, and here we have a vertical asymptote in the negative direction, because of course when we divide by negative, we get a negative. So this graph has an asymptote at the y-axis and the x-axis, and on this side an asymptote at the negative y-axis and along the negative x-axis.